Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. Going into the final round of the Rejkjavik Open, 3 players shared the lead. Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa from India, Max Warmerdam from the Netherlands, and Mads Andersen from Denmark. They all had 6.5 points. Really tight. Now, Warmerdam and Andersen played each other and they drew fairly quickly. So that meant that if Pragg could win his last round game, he would be the winner of the Rejkjavik Open. Now, he had a very tasty last round pairing. He was playing his compatriot, Domaraju Gukesh. So a lot at stake. Basically, this game would decide the tournament. 2 Indian prodigies facing each other. Gukesh, 15 years old. Pragg, much more experienced, 16 years old. Let's see what happened. So Gukesh with white. And it starts out as a Nimzo. I should say that Gukesh was a half a point behind Pragg. But if Gukesh won, then of course he would leap over him. And, well, there would be an enormous pile-up for first place. But so Gukesh could conceivably win the tournament. Let's see what happened. It's a Nimzo. So probably suits Gukesh to have, an unbalanced opening on the board. But it's solid enough for Pragg to play as well with black. And now d5. And of course the standard continuation here is knight to f3 for white. But instead Gukesh fairly quickly exchanged on d5. And this is a system that has come into fashion quite recently. Bishop goes back to d6. Rapport and Aronian had games with this as white against Vidit in Belgrade and in Berlin in the Grand Prix tournaments. And they both Rapport and Aronian won. Queen c2. So, as ever in Queen's Pawn openings, very nice to claim this diagonal. So what we have is basically a kind of exchange Queen's Gambit, except this bishop is on c1 and not on g5. And very often what white tries to do is play knight to e2, bishop d2, and after castles, you basically play for f3 and e4. I mean, this is a known strategy in the Queen's Gambit exchange variation, but with the bishop on g5 and sometimes dropping back round to f2 to support any push in the middle. So, sorry, that was probably very complicated. Basically, having developed and castled, white often aims to push forward in the middle. b6 played by Pragg after quite a big think, actually. So, perhaps he was just a little, taken aback by this slightly unusual variation from Gukesh. b4. So this is directed against black's advance c5. The other thing with b6 is that sometimes this bishop can come to a6 to exchange off this fine bishop on d3. So b4 starts a potential press on the queen side. So it's quite a sort of global system for white. And Pragg decides, okay, I'm not messing about. I just want to explode the centre. And that way white won't be able to press forward in the middle. And white still has to castle, of course. So in some ways, quite a logical sequence for black. But tactically, it's a bit funny because that bishop is loose for a moment. So black has to be very careful here. Rook e8, castles. And also, that pawn is potentially vulnerable. with rook d1. In fact, that's what happened. Bishop g4 looks like a reasonable way for black to play. You want to try and damage these pawns, and if the knight moves, well, for example, knight d7, maybe rook c8, and knight e5. I mean, it looks like black has enough play there. But Gukesh played sharply here. He played rook d1 after a big think, actually, almost 25 minutes. So it's a risky move because you allow the king side to be damaged a little bit. However, it's all about attacking that pawn on d5. And without that light squared bishop, that pawn on d5 is really vulnerable. So it's very brave of Gukesh to play like this. But of course, he is playing for a win. He knows if he wins, he will share first in the tournament. And it's very hard for black now. Okay, let's just, for example, play a normal developing move. Well, here the tactics work for white. Knight takes. If knight takes knight, then queen takes bishop. And of course, if queen takes knight, we have that very familiar bishop takes h7, discovered attack on the queen. So how should black play this? It's really not easy. Pragg went for bishop d6, so he's looking to try to generate maybe a little play here, but also after bishop b2, this is the game continuation. Bishop e5, perhaps looking to counter that bishop here, but it's already difficult for black because that rook hasn't developed. If that rook were on c8, different story, but it's not an easy position. Bishop b5, hitting the rook and also uncovering an attack with the rook. Knight d7, and Gukesh simply took on d5. So he's won a pawn after, well, 19 moves. And this pin also looks unpleasant for black as well. So clear extra pawn. The fact that these pawns are a little bit damaged on the king side doesn't seem to make much difference. White is a safe pawn up with the initiative. Rook e5 played by Pragg. Well, he's trying to clear the central situation and potentially swing over to the king side with random counter-attacking chances, but it's a pretty forlorn hope. Here, well, you know, white has a choice of how to proceed, but bishop takes d7 looks reasonable. Just, you know, you want to try and simplify things. Why not? If knight takes, then just king h1, and that is a beautiful piece in the middle of the board. And potentially rook g1 could come. So after bishop takes, rook takes, exchange of pieces, and that bishop came back to safety on h3, and it can of course cover the king. So white still a sound pawn up, and not only that, this knight is kind of floating around. You know, it's not anchored there in the middle. That's why you need your pawn to give it some support. But no pawn there. White is a pawn up. Now Pragg played the knight back to b6. You could go knight f6, but you know, where do you go from there? And the same can be said of knight b6. You know, it feels like a long way from where it should be, you know, protecting the king side. Queen e5 looks like nice centralization from Gukesh. Queen d2, but well, the queen isn't hitting much. f4, nice move, so the bishop can come back. Queen e2, well, Pragg is doing his best to, you know, find a way in for the queen, but really these light squares, they can be covered by that bishop. Rook c1, of course, activating the rook, looks very nice, and that c8 square is covered. Queen d3, queen d3. So Pragg just, you know, poking and probing with the queen, looking at the a pawn, maybe, you know, wants to come back to g6 with a check, but it doesn't look great for black. I mean, white has various ways to go here. Queen e7 looks pretty good, because actually there's no danger on the king side. The queen would protect the pawn. But queen c3, Gukesh, of course, would very much like to simplify. Exchange of queens would just give white a nice technical task and doesn't look too difficult with such active pieces. Rook d8. Well, you don't really want to exchange because black's rook is very active. So Gukesh changes tack and looks at the rook and also looks at the a-pawn. h6, of course, the back rank was vulnerable, so h6 played, gives the king an escape square, but it is on a light square. But I can understand why Pragg didn't want to play, the more traditional g6, because that would take away the g6 square and, rob black of any potential counterplay. But it's not ideal when the escape square is on a light square and your opponent has a light squared bishop. In any case, that's pawn number 2. Knight d5. The knight lacks an anchor, basically. It can't, find a good home. It's tricky. Bishop f1. Attacks the queen. Queen check and bishop g2. But, okay, now, yeah, I mean, at least black is fishing around here. Pragg is doing his best. Obviously, if that's taken, rook d1, if rook takes knight, let's try and highlight that. Rook takes knight, then rook d1 is mate. And there is a threat of knight e2, but, well, no panic. Rook f1, nice and tidy, nice and solid. That is a pretty good, solid fortress there. Queen d3, Pragg still trying. And now, well, a4. Why not? There's no real attack for black, but Pragg is at least trying. At least black's pieces are active. But it is 2 pawns. That rook may be looking to swing here. a5, rook g6. So this is a little bit scary. Pragg has found some activity here. King h1, very sensible. Just stepping out of the pin. And actually it's still very hard to see how black can make progress. King h7 from Pragg, just stepping off the back rank so there's no awkward check. And queen d4, please exchange, please exchange. Of course, if the queens are exchanged, then that's disastrous for black with that passed pawn here supported by the bishop. So, of course, queen f5 from black. Right, well, now is your time to have a little think. How would you finish things off if you were playing white here? So, Gukesh to play with white. Remember, if he wins, he will share first in the tournament. Pragg hanging on for dear life. He needs a draw. A win would be even better, but a draw at least would give him shared first. But white to play. What would you play here? I'll have a little slurp of tea. You have a little think. Cheers. White to play. What's the best way to steer this one to victory? Well, first of all, let's not play queen takes knight. Not smart, because then rook takes bishop. And that leads to a draw instantly by perpetual check, and so on. Best way to play, a very cool move, is pawn to h3, just taking away the g4 square from the queen. And very hard to see how black can actually lay a glove on white's king here. Actually, everything is super solid. Of course, queen takes pawn is possible. No doubt Gukesh didn't want to allow that, but actually there's a very nice move here. Queen d2, pin and win. And suddenly, black's coordination is shot through. Of course, white threatens to play rook c1, attacking the knight and winning. That rook can't move to c6 because that square is covered by the bishop. So, all right, let's try and avoid that. Queen a3, steps out of the pin. And now another pin, queen c2. This is a beautiful move. Now, I told you that king wasn't absolutely secure on h7. And now the threat could be to play rook c1 again, push the knight, and then bishop e4. So the king steps back. Rook c1 anyway, attacks the knight. Knight b5. And now there's a kind of cascade of tactical motifs. So we've had pins, and now we're going for the back rank. So attacks the rook. Queen c8. Check. The king can't step up. Queen f8. And now a simple little decoy. Bishop h7 wins the queen. Very nice. It's so interesting how in that position after h3, queen takes pawn, queen d2, that just disturbs black's coordination and suddenly white is winning that position. It's not just the extra pawn, it's about coordination and how white's pieces suddenly spring to life. However, instead of that, Gukesh played queen e5. A little bit too eager to exchange queens. Queen g4 threatens mate. And here, actually, bishop e4 would still hold the draw. After this, well, that can be taken, but now there really isn't an escape. That's a draw by perpetual check, which would suit Pragg. But what suited him even more was that in this position, with mate in one threatened, Gukesh defended it with rook g1. And then knight d1. What a shocker. Game over. Gukesh resigned. Threat. Knight takes f2. How do you deal with that? You can't take the knight because of the bishop is hanging. And if h3, knight takes f2, and queen g3, checkmate. What a turnaround. Incredible. So with that victory, Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa wins the Rejkjavik Open by half a point. Incredible. So he finished with 7.5 out of 9. And then 4 players on 7 points. Varmadam Anderson, Gretason and Abhimanyu Mishra. There we are. That's a name we haven't heard from a little bit. The youngest grandmaster in the world. So Praggnanandhaa goes from strength to strength. Well, you might say a lucky turnaround there, but, well, he kept his chances going and he held his nerve. That was the important thing. I feel sorry for Gukesh, who did play a very good game. So let's see, can Praggnanandhaa make the Indian Olympiad team? I think if he keeps going like that, then he has a good chance. I'll be posting a couple more, or maybe at least one more video about the Rejkjavik Open, because there were some tremendous games there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.